happen today. Instead of talking about 3 different things, we'll just talk about the work that we did during the week and have a discussion around it. Then we'll have a presentation about the open group in Sacm. ETSI, I guess, Tony is going to be presenting TC Cyber in Sacm and 3GPP SA3 in Sacm. And then we'll talk a little bit about milestones and decide a way forward. Is there any agenda bashing that needs to happen at this point? Any opinions? Nope. Okay.
Yeah, because can we agenda match and have work report discussion at the end?
If the remote presenters are available. So Brant and Tony are both remote. And do you see them in Meetup or on?
Tony was there. Recall them.
You don't see either of them? I am actually not even in our room. So if the remote presenters aren't available, then we necessarily can't really start with that. No? Okay. Okay, then I guess we can start off with the work report. So I've uploaded a slide. I suppose I should go up there or see. Do I go up there instead? Doesn't matter. Okay. All right. Let's see. Where do we want to go here? Okay. So basically, we met 3 times and had a bunch of discussions along the way. At first, during the first session, we talked a little bit about scope, and then I said, wait, that is a bad word. So let's talk about focus. And then ultimately, we started talking about prioritization. So we had a very long prioritization discussion. And there seemed to be a consensus throughout the discussion that we wanted to talk less about device type and more about the mechanisms of collection. And that actually will help focus our work between now and when we drive the information model to more of a close, and then get into the data model discussion where then prioritization is going to become important. We also, from that, had a state discussion, and it feels like we have some consensus that we're interested in state over behavior. So for example, we're not going to go and it's not our goal to verify that a web server will not negotiate a weak cipher sweep, though it's configured to not negotiate a weak cipher sweep. We'll look at the configuration, but we won't necessarily go and interact with that web server to find out what it will actually do. On the other hand, we do want to find things that we can get, the state of things. And I think that's kind of where we are right now in the discussion. So later we'll have a little bit of an open discussion about these things. But basically, that's where we are. Okay, next. We definitely recognize that we need to drive the information model home, which basically means get it to a working group last call state, so then we can work on submitting it to IESG. And yesterday we came up with a list of things that we might need for the information model to be more or less complete. We need models to, and these are kind of in plain terms, just so we can start with a more or less shared understanding. Hank and some other people have been working on defining more explicitly defined terms, and we'll talk about that as well. But we need models to identify an endpoint, identify hardware inventory, identify software inventory, describe available endpoint attributes for a given hardware or software item, describe observed value of an endpoint attribute for a given hardware or software item, And then we have a recognition that we basically have a client, sub-client, and it's not necessarily a Sacm component, but some client on the endpoint that provides the data, or we interact with a service that interacts with that client to get the data. So even in the quote agentless, you know, if you're interacting with a network device, for example, and you connect to a shell, that shell is really the client that you're interacting with to get the data. That's what we mean by client. It's not necessarily a Sacm component that's doing the assessment that would have to be installed on that thing. Okay, next. Sorry.
Yeah, so are you entertaining questions now or want to defer them to the end?
Say again?
I have a couple of questions, but will you take them now or? Okay, so my first one is why do you say we need models? So do you eventually foresee this being like a separate deliverable, or actually there are kind of sections using the same model?
I think that is so my impression at this point is that most of these things at this level would be in the information model. So the information model kind of needs to have these submodels in them, more or less. Or we could have separate models. I think that how they break out in drafts is that your question?
No, actually my question is whether how you break those in models, or if there are any advantages or disadvantages on breaking them in separate smaller models, or managing one bigger but more comprehensive model.
No, yeah, I think that is yet to be determined. If anybody in the working group has opinions on that, and we can open discussion.
Jessica, this is Jim, okay? And I say, hey, okay, so my voice is I think there is actually.
By the way, this hall actually hosted Ella Fitzgerald, Ike and Tina Turner, Sonny and Cher, and many other famous artists. Seriously.
I think there's a lot of value in breaking this down into smaller models. I think what we have described here, there are pieces of this that exist, and we can steal from other models that exist, standards that exist, and they're going to be very easy to standardize on. There's other sections I think that are going to take a lot more work for us. So I think if we actually break this down into separate models, that would be very valuable and would help us progress faster.
Jim Shaw, I'm trying to figure out exactly what is meant by describe available endpoint attributes. Is that this is the set of attributes that could be on that endpoint, or this is the attributes that happen to be on this particular endpoint at this given time?
I would say both.
Kathleen Moriarty, I'm just going to second Jessica. I was going to get up and say something very similar, because reusing existing models is going to help you tremendously, especially for different device types. And
Dave Woltmar, I'd also like to plus one Jessica and then address Jim's question. I think we really need two things. We need a listing of all of the available attributes that we can collect and evaluate for a given endpoint, whether or not they're defined or defaulted or however that mechanism would work on a given endpoint. Because 9 times out of 10, we're not going to be interested in collecting the full information that is available on that endpoint. We're generally going to be interested in, some subset that is relevant to, to the organization's use. So we need to be able to select from the menu of attributes, essentially, that we want to collect and evaluate. And then additionally, we need another method of representing the actual values that exist on the endpoint for those attributes. So I think we really need both. And both things are doing slightly different things.
So what you said in terms of you need to represent the actual values, that would be the last of the thing. Okay.
That's right.
What I'm saying is, do you need to have, is this is actually a list of the values for which there will be observed values.
That's correct.
Chris Masio, sir, I'd like to say, no, to all of that. And,
The back one?
we should pop up.
Can you move to a different mic because that one apparently is not working for remote people?
Now it's
Thank you.
All right, sorry. Is this one on at all? Okay. Should I start over? Chris Anasio, cert. So I would like to say that that we should not try to figure out every piece of data that we could possibly have on the table and start from there. Instead, we should understand that as the requirements are written now, and a better way to potentially make progress is to accept that we're going to accept a lot of different standards operating in the space. So STIX, TAXI, IODEF, IPFix, OVAL, soup du jour, all of them are going to be there. What we should focus on is just the key elements we need to be able to connect, the key identifiers going from an endpoint to the collector, from the collector to whatever repository, from the query capability to the repository, such that those things can then actually operate on the data and understand what data is available, right? And that data can be in any of those formats. So the data model is data models from other systems, unless we're going to tackle like kind of building the one true ring, but I don't think we should. I think we should go with the Scooby-Doo decoder ring model, and we should focus on doing that piece instead, right? Which means that all those underlying data models are welcome. They're already done. Whatever vendor thinks that, whatever data model they have is the best thing since sliced bread, good for them, and work on an interoperability layer that lets those things communicate.
So by interoperability layer, I mean, there's translation engines, those are used a lot. Is that what you mean?
I think if you wanted to make a good product in the market, you would have to build that, but I'm not interested or have any desire to specify such a thing.
Okay. All right, good. Because yeah, that doesn't seem like something, but it really followed from what you were saying.
So I think what I'm effectively saying is we would need to be able to define enough of an information model and data model to be able to define the metadata of what gets put into the repository, such that you can arbitrarily determine what's there that you could use. But then how you act on that, that's a whole nother problem that we just kind of don't solve necessarily.
So I think this is really hard. So looking at, a few of us in the room, we have to worry about different things. So taking off my AD hat at EMC, we have to worry about storage. And that right now, the most popular interface is a RESTful interface with, give me just a second and recall what this, I led a whole project on this. No, wait, what? No. The data model. So it's not in the IETF. It's a DMTF set of standards. And
SIM.
SIM is part of it, and then SMIS is another. So, to put on other interfaces would be tough. And Nancy's dealing with Yang modules, and the list goes on and on.
Yeah, but we should not, Dara Mashkano speaking, so we should not forget that we are talking here about the information model, which is kind of the higher level protocol independent, while the real interoperability will be measured at the data model level with instantiates in specific data modeling languages, the information model.
Yeah, so my point is more that we're checking for very different things.
So I think I want to try and regurgitate because oh, sorry. I'm Nancy. What's my last? Cam Winget. It's like, I'm not awake yet. So I think I agree with Chris in the sense that the way I think of an information model is the abstraction of the different types of information and the interactions or operations that need to occur. How they get instantiated into a particular data model, I believe as a group we have agreed that there will be many. And again, to reiterate to Kathleen's point, the data model is yet another level of abstraction that out of scope for us in the group, how we do the storage considerations underneath is up to the implementers, because there's going to be optimizations on data size, deployment size, and all of that. So while I like the focus in there's these list of things, right? I just want to make sure that we're staying still for the information model, we're staying at the abstraction to allow for the sticks, the text, sorry, sticks, yeah, all the flavors to come in.
So I agree with all of that too, and I think that's actually somewhat what is meant by this, right? Because we're not saying that we're going to enumerate how you check for minimum password length for Microsoft Windows or Red Hat Linux, or all of the other variations that exist on that theme, right? What we're talking about here is how do we generalize a way to record, to allow those things to be instantiated in a model that would allow for some interoperability. I think that's what we're trying to talk about here, both at an information model level and I think likely at a data model level as well.
So Chris Nacio, I don't want necessarily to create interoperability at a data model level. I think the reality is if we're going to make progress, it's going to be caveat emptor, a little bit of buyer beware. Because if you're going to accept multiple data models into your ecosystem, then interaction on multiple data models is just too hard. It's going to take too long. And to that point, it's not clear to me that you need to identify what a hardware, how to do or handle a hardware inventory. And I don't necessarily think that we need to understand or do how to identify a software inventory. What we potentially need to do is understand that there are code points that, we could have SWIDs, we could have CPEs, we should have an information model, and our data model should allow the exchange of those types of data points between Sacm components. And how does that interoperate? However the implementer makes it interoperate, that's up to them.